that Meghan Markle continues to use her royal title.
I don't believe that that's her voice, on the grounds that every photograph we've seen of the alleged.
The blow did not come in public. It did not arrive through cameras, speeches, or palace announcements. It came through a sealed royal notice, delivered quietly and read behind closed doors. Meghan opened it, expecting routine language. But what she found was a sentence that cut through years of tension. King Charles had secretly removed her from the royal family trust, and nothing about her place in the monarchy would ever feel secure again. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan held the paper longer than she needed to. Her eyes moved over the words once, as if the sentence might soften in that moment. It did not. The Royal Family Trust, a private family arrangement used here as a structure for legacy-linked provisions, symbolic benefits, and internal recognition, no longer carried her name. That mattered because Meghan had believed some connection still remained through marriage, through her children, through the years when she had stood inside the royal circle. It mattered because removal from that structure was not just about money or documents. It told her the palace had chosen separation in writing. Harry came in before she spoke. He saw the paper first, then her face, and the silence between them became heavier than any argument. Meghan did not cry. She tightened her hand around the notice and asked one question. When did he sign it? Harry took the sheet, but the answer was already there. Charles had signed a private directive, removing Meghan from the Royal Family Trust, without personal warning, without a call, without allowing her to hear it from him first. The king's signature made the decision final, and that finality cut deeper than any public slight. Meghan understood the message beneath the formal language. The document did not only remove a name, it severed a remaining thread. A royal directive, meaning a written order carrying the monarch's authority inside palace structures, had turned years of conflict into one cold act. Harry read the same line and felt his anger rise, because he knew his father had not simply protected the crown, he had drawn a boundary around his wife. The room changed after that. Meghan placed the notice on the table and stared at it as though it had arrived from another life. Harry asked whether William knew. She looked up at him then, sharper, quieter, more wounded than before. The question was no longer what Charles had done. The question was, who had stood near the king when the final line was drawn? And that answer would hurt even more. Every royal crisis has signatures, but this one had faces. Charles carried the burden of authority. Harry carried the pain of divided loyalty. William carried the cold weight of the future. And Meghan carried the humiliation of being excluded from a system she had once entered as family. Behind the official wording was something far more personal, a battle over belonging, bloodline, memory, and who the monarchy still considered its own. Charles knew the decision would not sit quietly inside palace files. He had signed it as king, but he felt it as a father. That was the fracture no advisor could soften. The monarchy demanded clean lines, firm structures, and protection from future disputes. Yet Harry's household was not some distant branch on a chart. It was his son's home. It was Meghan's place in the family story. It was Archie and Lilibet's shadow over every word. The Royal Family Trust, which in this story means a private family structure tied to symbolic recognition, legacy protections, and internal status, had become more than an arrangement. It had become a test of who remained close enough to be protected. Harry did not receive the notice with silence. He paced, stopped, read the sentence again, and paced once more. Meghan stayed seated, and that quietness unsettled him more than anger would have. She had expected distance from the palace. She had expected coldness. But secrecy carried a different wound. It told her the decision had been made around her, about her, and against her, before she had even been given the dignity of knowing. Harry looked at her, waiting for outrage. But Meghan's hurt had gone deeper than that. She was thinking of Archie. She was thinking of Lilibet. She was asking herself whether the palace had quietly moved their children further from the family's symbolic heart. William saw the matter through another lens. To him, the trust was part of the monarchy's future architecture, the planned structure of roles, protections, and private recognition that would shape the next reign before it arrived. The prince believed loose ends could become battles. He believed vague family ties could become public confusion. And because William carried the future so closely, he supported tightening every informal connection before his own era began. Yet that firmness came with a cost. Every line drawn for stability created another emotional scar. Camilla's nearness to the discussions made the wound sharper. Meghan suspected the queen consort understood exactly how the notice would land before it was ever sent. In a documented palace account prepared for Charles, a senior courtier warned that the trust decision would not remain private for long. The king read that warning and said nothing at first, because he knew the storm was already forming. The question was no longer whether Meghan would feel betrayed. The question was what had happened before this moment to convince the palace that betrayal was the price it was willing to pay. To understand why the king signed so quietly, the story must return to the private moment that turned suspicion into action. The palace did not arrive at this decision overnight. Long before the sealed notice reached Meghan, one private dinner had changed the temperature inside the royal household. It was not grand, not public, not recorded for history. Yet those present remembered the silence afterward. A single conversation at Windsor became the trigger everyone later recognized as the point of no return. Harry had entered that evening, carrying more than frustration. He carried the fear that his children were becoming names on the edge of the family, close enough to be mentioned when convenient, distant enough to be excluded when decisions mattered. Archie and Lilibet were not present, yet their absence shaped every word he chose. The family-linked arrangements, meaning private systems that connect royal relatives to recognition, protections, and long-term provisions, had begun to feel uncertain. Harry wanted clarity. He wanted assurance. Most of all, he wanted proof that Meghan had not been quietly pushed outside a door everyone else still pretended was open. Charles listened without interrupting. That silence made the room feel heavier, because the king understood the danger inside the request before anyone else said it aloud. Harry spoke of fairness, but Charles heard accusation. He heard his son asking whether the monarchy still knew how to treat his family as family. Meghan's name then entered the conversation, and everything changed. The question was simple, but it landed with force. Should her status still carry private trust recognition after the distance, the disputes, and the public rupture? The Royal Family Trust, used here as a private structure for symbolic standing and legacy-linked protections, suddenly stopped feeling like a quiet arrangement and became a battlefield. William answered with care, but not softness. The prince told Harry that affection and access were no longer the same thing. He did not say it cruelly, yet the meaning cut deep. A family could still care, he implied, without leaving every institutional door unlocked. Harry pushed back, saying that Meghan had been judged not as a person, but as a problem. William held firm, because he believed the future reign could not inherit blurred lines, emotional pressure, and unresolved claims. The exchange did not explode. It became worse than that. It cooled. Charles's face changed when Harry demanded written confirmation that Meghan remained protected under the trust. That moment became known inside the palace as the Windsor Trust Dinner, the private incident that turned concern into action. In a documented internal account later prepared for the monarch, an aide described the demand as the first clear sign that a quiet family arrangement could become a future fight over money, status, and recognition. Charles understood then that silence would no longer protect anyone. The king left that dinner knowing the matter had crossed a line. Harry believed he had defended his wife and children. William believed he had warned his brother before the future hardened. Charles believed he had seen the shape of a coming storm. From that night forward, aides began drafting options, and the path toward a direct confrontation with Meghan became impossible to avoid. And when the decision finally reached her hands, Meghan did not want explanations from courtiers. She wanted answers from the family itself. The confrontation came without cameras, without prepared statements, and without the careful polish of royal diplomacy. Meghan wanted one thing: to hear from Charles why she had been removed in secret. Harry wanted accountability. The king wanted control. What followed was not a formal meeting, but a family reckoning, where every word carried the weight of years of resentment, and every pause felt like a verdict. Meghan refused to let palace lawyers become the only voice in the matter. She had already read the notice. She had already felt the meaning behind the words. Now she wanted the person behind the signature. Harry stood beside her in that demand, not as a prince seeking favor, but as a husband who believed his wife had been judged in silence. A private conversation, meaning a closed family meeting without advisors shaping every sentence, became the only path left before the wound turned permanent. Charles agreed, but he set one condition at first: no aides, no legal team, no formal briefing. The monarch wanted to contain what the institution had already unleashed. Meghan sat across from him with a calm that made the moment more dangerous. She did not raise her voice. She did not rush. She asked why she had not been warned, and the simplicity of the question struck harder than accusation. Charles looked at her, then at Harry, and for a few seconds, the authority of the crown could not protect him from the pain in the room. The royal family trust, the private structure tied here to family recognition, legacy-linked protections, and symbolic standing, had become the center of a confrontation no palace phrase could soften. Meghan wanted to know why her name had been removed before she had been treated like someone worthy of a conversation. Harry leaned forward before his father could answer fully. He told Charles that secrecy had become the palace's weapon, and that every silent decision only proved the family had learned how to wound without leaving fingerprints. The king lowered his gaze, and when he finally spoke, his answer carried discipline but no warmth. He said the removal had been framed as a protective measure, designed to prevent future disputes over royal assets, private expectations, and the meaning of family recognition after years of public strain. Harry heard strategy. Meghan heard exile. Charles tried to explain that the directive was meant to protect the monarchy from future battles, but Meghan understood the deeper truth. This was not only financial, it was not simply administrative. It was a symbolic declaration that the palace had redrawn the family boundary around her and chosen to leave her outside it. A directive, meaning a written order carrying royal authority inside palace structures, had turned emotion into policy. The king set his pen down before delivering the final blow. He told them the decision could not be reversed. Meghan did not move, but something in the room shifted. Harry stared at his father, as though the last bridge had cracked beneath them. That single sentence changed the room, because Meghan now understood that the decision was bigger than Charles alone. Power in the monarchy rarely announces itself loudly. It moves through signatures, committees, old agreements, sealed instructions, and quiet nods across polished tables. Meghan had confronted the king, but the trust itself belonged to a deeper machinery. Behind Charles stood advisors, trustees, family expectations, and the future reign William was already preparing to inherit. William understood that machinery better than most. He knew the monarchy could survive anger, scandal, even years of public division, but it struggled with uncertainty. Uncertainty created loopholes. Loopholes created pressure. Pressure became crisis. The royal family trust, meaning the private family structure in this story, that connects select members to legacy protections, symbolic recognition, and internal status, had always depended on discretion. It worked because the public rarely saw it, because family arrangements remained hidden behind tradition, and because each generation accepted the boundaries drawn by the one before. Meghan's name, however, had become a question inside that system, and questions were dangerous when the future reign was being shaped. William opened the trust file and paused when he reached Meghan. The prince did not need to speak for the weight of the moment to settle around him. Duty offered one answer. Sympathy offered another. He chose duty, not because it was painless, but because he believed the crown could not enter its next chapter, carrying unresolved claims and emotional debts. A trustee, meaning a person appointed to help oversee private family arrangements and protect their rules, had already warned that Meghan's continued inclusion could create confusion after the next succession shift. William saw that warning as more than legal caution. He saw it as a future storm, waiting for the right moment. Charles carried the same file differently. The king had signed the directive, but the signature did not free him from its cost. He knew Harry would see it as rejection. He knew Meghan would feel stripped of dignity. He also knew delay could make the wound wider, because every month of silence gave the matter more emotional weight. In a private advisory note recorded for the monarch, Palace Council warned that leaving Meghan inside the trust might create expectations over royal assets, symbolic standing, and family recognition. That note did not shout. It did something colder. It made exclusion sound necessary. The painful truth was that Meghan had been discussed for months before the sealed notice ever reached her hands. Her name had moved through private conversations, trust reviews, and family briefings while she remained outside the room. Charles had hesitated, but hesitation had not saved her. William had reviewed the risks, and risk had outweighed mercy. The trustees had pressed for clarity, and clarity had become removal. That discovery changed the meaning of everything. Meghan had believed the notice was the moment the door closed. In truth, the door had been closing long before she heard it shut. Once the machinery of monarchy began moving, it did not stop for hurt feelings, family history, or unanswered questions. It moved because it was built to protect the crown first and comfort people second. And as that machinery locked into place, the consequences did not begin on palace steps or across newspaper pages. They began in the quiet space where Harry and Meghan had to face what the decision now meant for their family. As the trust doors closed, the emotional doors inside the Sussex household opened to anger, fear, and a new reality neither could ignore. The first fallout was not a headline. It was a room gone quiet. Meghan placed the notice on a table and stared at it, as though the paper itself had taken something from her. Harry wanted to fight immediately, but she understood the deeper message. This was not only removal from a trust, it was removal from a story the palace no longer wanted her to share. Meghan felt the silence settle before Harry could break it. He wanted calls made, statements prepared, legal pressure applied, but she understood that anger alone would not answer what had happened. Their connection to royal structures now had to be measured differently. Titles still existed. Memories still existed. Public recognition still followed their names. But behind the palace walls, another layer had been stripped away. Ceremonial recognition, meaning the private acknowledgement of someone's place during family events and formal royal moments, suddenly felt uncertain. Family communications, the quiet channels through which personal updates and internal decisions moved, no longer felt safe. Meghan saw how one document could turn belonging into distance. Harry reached for the notice again, but Meghan quietly removed it from his hand and folded it herself. That small act changed the mood. Her first shock had hardened into controlled resolve. She was not collapsing under the decision. She was studying it. She was asking what it meant for Archie and Lilibet, not only in financial terms, but in emotional language the palace rarely admitted using. Symbolic provisions, meaning private signs of family recognition, not always tied to money, mattered, because children could feel absence before they understood documents. Meghan feared the message had moved beyond her name and into their future. Harry felt torn, in a way that made his anger sharper. He wanted to defend Meghan with every part of himself, yet Charles's signature pulled him backward into grief. The king had not shouted, he had not attacked. He had simply signed, and that made the rejection feel colder. Harry could fight a public insult. He could answer a statement. But this was different. This was his father, using royal authority to close a door that family had once kept open. Then, the second blow arrived. Meghan learned, through a documented briefing from her advisors, that palace staff had already updated internal lists before she received official confirmation. Her removal had not only been decided, it had been processed. A second document restricted future references to Meghan inside trust-related communications, meaning her name would no longer appear in certain private records connected to that structure. The decision had become practical, as well as symbolic, and that made it harder to dismiss as a misunderstanding. Harry looked at the folded notice and realized the palace had moved faster than their pain could keep up. Meghan remained still, but her calm carried warning. Anger was beginning to settle into something permanent. Separation was no longer an emotion, it was becoming a strategy. And just when that distance seemed ready to harden forever, one private meeting shifted the crisis away from paperwork and back toward blood. The next shift did not come from lawyers, trustees, or palace aides. It came from two people speaking plainly, with nothing left to hide. The turning point arrived in a conversation stripped of ceremony. No aides, no briefing papers, no palace language softening the edges. Just Harry and Charles, father and son, facing the wreckage of a decision neither could pretend was painless. For the first time since the notice arrived, the argument was no longer about the trust. It was about what remained between them after the trust was gone. Harry did not ask for the meeting because he believed the decision would be reversed. That hope had already been crushed by the king's final words. He asked because he needed to know whether the bond beneath the titles had been sacrificed too. The royal family trust, meaning the private family structure tied in this story to legacy protections, symbolic recognition, and internal standing, had achieved what the palace wanted: clarity. But clarity had not come cleanly. It had left Meghan wounded, Harry furious, and Charles facing the personal damage created by his own authority. The king understood that institutional order could still feel like family rejection when it arrived through sealed paperwork. Harry spoke first, and this time his anger did not rush ahead of him. He told his father that Meghan had experienced the notice as humiliation, not simply exclusion. She had not been invited into a difficult conversation. She had been informed after the decision was already complete. Charles did not defend the timing. He could have hidden behind advisors, trustees, or legal language, but he knew secrecy had made the blow crueler. A sealed notice, meaning a formal private document delivered without public announcement, may have protected the palace from spectacle, yet it had denied Meghan the dignity of being treated as a person before being treated as a problem. Charles admitted what he had avoided saying before. He feared another public dispute. He feared more headlines, more accusation, more years of the monarchy explaining itself through conflict. Harry expected coldness, but what he saw was exhaustion. The king was not celebrating the removal, he was carrying it. That did not erase the damage, and Harry did not pretend it did. But for one moment, the battle shifted. It was no longer father against son. It was two men facing what monarchy had taken from both of them. Then Charles drew the line that could not be crossed. He would not restore Meghan to the trust. The decision was final, but he offered a private assurance that Archie and Lilibet would not be emotionally erased from the family. The children, he said, must not become casualties of adult fracture. Harry heard the promise carefully, because promises inside palaces could become fragile things. He accepted that the trust removal would stand, but he demanded one condition in return. Meghan would never again learn a family decision through sealed paperwork alone. That fragile understanding did not heal the rupture. It did not restore trust. It did not undo the shock that had entered Meghan's life with one royal signature, but it changed the direction of the crisis. Charles had preserved the structure, Harry had defended his family's dignity, and the palace now had to prepare for the part it feared most: the world outside the closed door. By morning, the private wound had become a public spectacle, and the monarchy had to watch the world judge what it had done. The story broke with the force of a royal earthquake. What began as a sealed notice became the conversation on every screen, every front page, and every palace sidewalk. The public did not see trust clauses or advisory notes. They saw a woman cut out, a prince divided, a king under pressure, and a monarchy once again forced to explain where family ended and institution began. Meghan watched the coverage without speaking. That silence said more than any statement could. She had already lived the humiliation in private, but now the world was naming it, judging it, pulling it apart line by line. Harry stood nearby, restless and furious, because their family pain had become public theater again. The palace response, meaning the official message prepared to control how the monarchy explains a crisis, avoided emotional language. It spoke of continuity, private family governance, and long-standing structures. But those careful words could not hide the wound. The decision mattered because it showed how far the crown would go to protect itself. It also mattered because it proved that even family bonds could be managed like risks. Charles received the morning summaries with a tired expression. Every headline turned a private decision into a national judgment, and the king knew the palace could not control what people felt. Commentators framed the removal as a defining test of his reign. Some praised the monarch for choosing stability. Others asked whether stability meant anything if compassion had been left behind. A reign, meaning the period in which a monarch rules, is judged not only by ceremonies and laws, but by the human choices made under pressure. Charles had chosen order. Now he had to carry the cost of how cold that order looked from the outside. Then came the moment that captured everything. A major London newspaper ran a stark front page, cut from the trust, placing Meghan's image beside the king's signature. The phrase landed like a verdict before any palace explanation could soften it. Harry saw it and felt the anger return, because the world was seeing the wound, but not the years of pressure behind it. Meghan looked at the page and understood that the decision had now become part of her public identity. Not a clause, not a quiet adjustment, a symbol. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates. Some defended Charles, saying the monarchy had to protect its future from confusion and conflict. Others called the decision needlessly harsh, arguing that no family should treat a woman that way through sealed paperwork. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's central official residence in London, became the place where private pain turned into public argument. And as the crowd grew louder, the final meaning sharpened. This was no longer only about Meghan. It was about the monarchy deciding who belonged inside its future, and who would be remembered from the outside. When the noise settled, one truth remained standing. The trust had closed, and with it, an entire chapter of royal possibility had ended. In the end, the removal was more than a signature. It was a royal verdict written in private and felt in public. Meghan lost a formal place inside a structure she once believed still carried traces of belonging. Harry lost another bridge to the family he was born into. Charles preserved the institution, but at a cost no document could soften. Meghan did not break when the noise settled. She placed the notice away with a quiet resolve that said shock had become acceptance, and acceptance had become strength. The royal family trust, meaning the private family structure, tied in this story to legacy protections, symbolic recognition, and internal standing, no longer carried her name. That mattered because it showed the palace had not simply adjusted a document, it had defined the boundary of belonging. It mattered because Meghan had once entered that world as family, yet now the institution had decided that history, marriage, and pain were not enough to keep her inside its private walls. Harry understood the finality in a way anger could no longer hide. His father's decision could not be undone, and the grief inside him shifted. It was no longer only rage over Meghan's humiliation. It was the painful recognition that the old family map was gone. Charles had acted as king, but Harry felt the wound as a son. The monarch had protected the crown, meaning the royal institution and everything it represents, but protection had come with distance. Every line made clearer for the future made the family feel colder in the present. Charles was left with a victory that felt heavy. He had secured the structure, he had removed uncertainty, he had answered the trustees, calmed the machinery, and protected the monarchy from what advisors feared could become a future dispute. Yet the king knew discipline had not brought peace. It had deepened the space between himself and Harry. In a documented palace account prepared after the decision, one senior advisor described the trust removal as clean in structure, painful in consequence. And that phrase captured the entire reign-defining wound. William saw the decision as necessary before the next era could begin. The prince believed clarity had to come before succession, because the future could not be built on blurred expectations. Yet even he understood that clarity could leave scars. Meghan had been blindsided. Harry had been wounded. Charles had been burdened. The monarchy had chosen structure over softness, boundaries over reconciliation, and preservation over sentiment. It emerged more controlled, more disciplined, more protected, but less whole. The verdict was final. Meghan's place inside the royal family trust was gone, and the monarchy had chosen the shape of its future, even if that future came with silence where family once stood. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.